Hey everybody, my name is Justen Williams and I'm a music producer from New Orleans. Propeller had invited me over today to talk about one of the things that's probably more important in my production than anything else. I'm talking about controllers. These little devices can often replace this little device. And the impact it can have on the way that you make music is something that you have to experience if you haven't yet. Keyboard and pad controllers have been around for decades, and there's a reason that they've remained so popular. Let me show you what I mean by making some music with you today. For this video, I'll be using my travel setup. I'm lucky enough to where I can travel to different cities to be able to work with different artists and different producers. And when I'm on the go, there's a few essential tools that I always bring with me. My laptop for one, because without Reason I couldn't do what I do. In addition to that, you'll find me with a portable keyboard. In my case, the Akai MPK 25 wireless, and a pad controller, the Akai LPD8 wireless. Now, maybe you're wondering why I'm using both when I could probably do the majority of the work with just the keyboard. Well, the answer is a bit philosophical because I could actually use either. For example, I could play drums on the keyboard. Or I could play melodies on the pad controller. But both of these controllers specialize in a certain kind of music making. So, to get the most out of my music, I use both. But I can show you better than I can tell you, so let's start this off with some drums. If I drag a Kong into my rack, reset it to clear any settings, I can load a Nurse Rex loop player on the pad 1. I got this Rex file here. Pad 1 on Kong maps directly to the first pad on the controller. The great thing about Rex files is that it follows the song's tempo. If I speed this up and trigger my loop again, the loop follows right along. But let's not just trigger a full tempo sync loop. Let's chop it up. Rex files are loops made of sliced waveforms. You can see them here as I select each one. And Kong has different ways of playing Rex slices. The default is loop trig, which is why we hear the entire loop when we hit our pad. Instead, let's set our Kong pad to chunk trig. Now, we can go through the first 8 pads on Kong, assigning them to the Nurse Rex on drum 1, and setting each of them to chunk trig. As I do this, you might notice that our loop is automatically getting subdivided and split across the pads. Now, we can trigger chunks of our loop via our pads. I can play them in order to get the original loop, or we can experiment with juggling and come up with new fills and variations. Let's lay down a few bars with the standard loop and some juggled variation. Our part sounds great, but the drums could use a little love. We can start by adding some character using compression. Every channel in Reason's mixer has a compressor that's modeled after the SSL 9000K console and its legendary dynamic section. I'll activate the compressor, crank up the ratio pretty high so it's really squashing our sound. Turn down the release to give it some bounce, and lower the threshold so the compressor is kicking in completely at all times. The second way we can give our drums some love is actually by adding more drums on top. Reason's other classic drum machine is the Red Drum. Let's drag a copy of that underneath our Kong. Red Drum has a built-in sequencer that we could use to program our drums, but its channels line up perfectly with the pads on the controller just like they did with the pads on Kong. Now I can record some kick and snare over my Rex loop, but still keep the human feel thanks to the pads on my controller. To add melodic lines or bass lines to my beat, I switch my focus to my keyboard controller. Now, using the keyboard controller isn't exactly rocket science, but there are some tricks that I use with this portable setup that give me results that sound like I'm using a much bigger controller. For example, if we were to bring a Europa synth into our sequencer, we could of course play chords on our controller. The chords that we play have to fit within the 25 keys that we have on our controller. However, if I add one of Reason's players above the Europa synth in my rack, I can then play chords using single note input. What's even better is I can add notes both an octave above and an octave below, and I can spread the notes in my chord out across the keyboard using open chords. Now, I can play my LPK 25 and get the range of a full-size keyboard. Saying all of this doesn't change the fact that we can still use our keyboard the traditional way to write melodies on top. Or I can transpose it down a couple octaves and play some deep bass lines. By now, you probably realize why I chose to use the pads for the drums and the keys for the melodies. But more importantly, you can see that controllers are only an expression of our human feel. Stay with me while I add a B section. Now that you're caught up to speed, let's get busy. How about some strings? So here's another one. We can drag a note echo in above our cellos and select double octave up. Since this is a B section, let's freshen up our drums back on the pads. Let's add a track of zildjian hi-hats and play them just like a drummer would. Alright, let's go back to the keys and add some piano. Some plucks. Alright, let's set some loop markers to jump us back to the A section. So that's what it means to use controllers with Reason. They're fast, they're the best way that I've found to get the groove out, and they're fun. And there's a lot that you can do with these portable controllers like the LPK and LPD. So thank you for watching, and go make some music.